The first sound that night was not music or laughter. It was the zipper of her purse. I heard it before I saw her face. She was standing near the balcony, the city lights spilling behind her like a scene from a movie, and I was just close enough to watch her freeze as she dug inside. Her fingers brushed something metallic, and I knew the exact moment she felt the shape of my ring. Her hand stopped dead, like the purse itself had bitten her. I had put it there, of course. No one at that party knew I had slipped in earlier, moving like a ghost between unfamiliar faces, watching her as she laughed with people who didn't even know I existed. It was her colleague's private party, his exclusive little gathering of perfect teeth and fake smiles, and she was shining brighter than ever. I hated it. I hated how comfortable she looked without me in her orbit. That's when the idea struck. Not a plan, not some well-thought scheme, just a raw, messy impulse. I pulled my wedding ring from my pocket and shoved it into her purse, along with a note I had written weeks ago but never dared to show her. The note was short, sharp, almost cruel. Remember who you really belong to. When she read it, her eyes widened like she'd been stabbed. She looked around, scanning faces, her breath uneven. Panic washed over her features, and I knew she wasn't just startled. She was guilty. I wanted to step out from the shadows and confront her right there. I wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth out of her. But something stopped me. Her expression wasn't just fear. It was the look of someone caught in a trap they set for themselves. And that terrified me even more. She quickly zipped the purse, forcing a smile as someone called her name from across the room. I watched her lift a glass of wine with trembling fingers, pretending everything was fine. I could see her lips move as she whispered something to herself, something I couldn't hear. I didn't know it yet, but this was the start of something much bigger, something darker than just suspicion. I didn't leave the party immediately after seeing her reaction. Something in me refused to. Instead, I slipped out onto the balcony, hiding just behind a row of tall potted plants, where I could see her reflection in the glass doors. Marla's smile had completely changed. It was no longer bright and effortless. It was forced, trembling at the corners, the kind of smile people wear when they're terrified of cracking. She clutched her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. I watched her excuse herself from a small circle of colleagues and disappear down the hallway. For a moment, I hesitated, torn between following her and staying hidden. My chest was tight, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Did she recognize the ring? Of course she did. But was her panic about me finding out something? Or was it about what she'd already done? Curiosity won. I slipped inside, blending into the background like I wasn't supposed to be there, which I wasn't. The hallway was dim, but I could see the faint light of the bathroom door cracked open at the end. That's when I heard her voice. She was whispering into her phone. I could barely make out the words, but the tone said everything. It was urgent, frightened, pleading. Then I heard a name. Not mine. Spencer. The way she said it didn't sound like a casual coworker. It sounded personal. Too personal. My stomach twisted into knots as I leaned against the wall, trying not to breathe too loudly. No. It's here, she whispered sharply, her voice breaking. I don't know how. No. He couldn't. Then silence. I stumbled back before she came out, my mind buzzing. I didn't even remember walking back into the main room. People were still laughing, drinking, oblivious to the storm quietly forming between us. She returned moments later, her face composed but pale. She didn't notice me watching from across the room, but I could see the tiny tremor in her hand as she placed the phone into her purse. Something inside me snapped that night. It wasn't anger. It was this sickening cocktail of fear and doubt. I left the party without saying a word, my footsteps echoing down the stairs like gunshots. But the night wasn't over. Not even close. The morning after the party felt like waking up inside a storm that hadn't passed. Marla was already in the kitchen when I walked in, her back turned, making coffee like nothing had happened. But I could see it in her posture. Too stiff, too careful. She wasn't humming like she usually did on weekends. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Morning," and her voice cracked just slightly. It was enough to confirm my gut feeling. Something was wrong, and she knew I knew it. I sat at the table, watching her every move. My mind wouldn't let go of what I heard last night. Spencer. The way she whispered his name as though the world would collapse if someone overheard. I wanted to ask her right then, to slam my hands on the table and demand the truth, but I didn't. Instead, I played the fool. How was the party? I asked, pretending like I wasn't there. She froze for half a second before turning, a fake smile plastered across her face. Oh, the usual. Too many people, too much wine. She avoided my eyes. That's when I decided I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to know what I was up against, because deep down, a part of me was terrified that whatever truth was hiding behind her silence would break me completely. While she was in the shower, I did something I've never done in our marriage. I went through her purse. My hands were shaking as I unzipped it, the same sound I'd heard the night before. My ring was still there, shoved into the corner, along with the note. But there was something else, something I wasn't expecting, a small envelope with no name on it. Inside, there was a hotel keycard. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting at the table, trying to look calm even though my pulse was pounding. She kissed my cheek lightly, like nothing was out of place, and said she had errands to run that afternoon. I let her leave without a word, but the moment the door closed behind her, I grabbed my keys and the card. I don't know what I was expecting when I drove to that hotel. Maybe I thought I'd find nothing, that it would be some innocent misunderstanding. But as I stood in front of room 418, my hand on the door handle, I knew I was about to step into something I couldn't unsee. When I slid that key card into the slot and heard the soft click of the door unlocking, it felt like my heart stopped. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my hand gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. The hallway behind me was silent, but inside my head, everything was loud. The pounding of my pulse, the sound of my breath, the thousand questions racing like bullets. I pushed the door open slowly, afraid of what I'd find, half expecting to walk in on something I wasn't ready to see. The room was empty. Too empty. It smelled faintly of perfume, Marla's perfume. I recognized it instantly, that warm vanilla scent she wears only on special occasions. My stomach twisted. She'd been here, no doubt about it. The curtains were slightly open, letting a strip of sunlight spill across the bed, which was perfectly made, but I noticed a detail that nearly stopped me cold. On the desk near the window sat a glass of red wine, half finished, and next to it, a cufflink. A man's cufflink, sleek and silver, engraved with the initials S.T. Spencer Thompson. I stared at that cufflink like it was a piece of evidence in some crime scene, my mind piecing together fragments of conversations, strange moments I had ignored, all the late nights she claimed she was working on projects. Every memory now felt like a lie. My first instinct was to call her, to scream into the phone and demand answers, but I couldn't. My throat felt locked shut, and my anger was tangled up with this sickening, hollow ache I can't even describe. I sat down on the edge of the bed, clutching my wedding ring in my hand, and that's when I saw it, another note. It was tucked halfway under the pillow, as if someone had left it behind in a rush. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and unfolded it. The handwriting wasn't Marla's. It was sharp, deliberate, almost too neat. The note read, "Don't let him find out. We're too close now to stop." I felt the air leave my lungs. My entire body went cold. I wanted to tear the room apart, to find every hidden detail, but at the same time, I felt like I'd already seen too much. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was reality. And the reality was that my wife was keeping a secret life from me, one that was unfolding right under my nose. I left the hotel room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I walked down the hallway. It was irrational, but I swear I felt eyes on me, like someone knew I had just crossed a line I wasn't supposed to. By the time I got home, Marla was already there, casually folding laundry like she hadn't just left pieces of her betrayal scattered in that hotel room. She looked at me with that same soft smile she's always had, and I almost laughed at how normal she seemed. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because now, I had something I hadn't had before, proof. The question is, what do you do when the person you trust most is the one holding the knife behind your back? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that the next move had to be mine. That night, I barely slept. I lay next to Marla, staring at the ceiling while she breathed softly beside me, as if nothing in her world was broken. I kept replaying every moment in that hotel room. The wine glass, the cufflink, the note, and the realization that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. But I couldn't just accuse her without hearing what came out of her own mouth. I needed to catch her off guard, to watch how she reacted when she didn't have time to lie. I had to know the truth, even if it shattered me. The next morning, I told her I had to work late, but in reality, I left my office early and parked my car 2 streets away from our house. I sat there for hours, watching, waiting, feeling like a stranger stalking his own life. At 6:15 p.m., I saw it. A black SUV pulled up to our driveway. Spencer. I recognized him instantly from the company dinner months ago. The perfect hair, the expensive watch, the smug smile that made me want to punch something. Marla stepped outside, dressed too elegantly for a casual evening, and they exchanged a look I'll never forget. It wasn't a casual smile or a friendly hello. It was something electric, something secret. They drove off together, and I followed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt, but I didn't care. They didn't go to a restaurant or a bar like I half expected. They went back to that same hotel. Watching them disappear into the lobby together was like swallowing glass. I could have stormed in right then, but a darker part of me wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted them to feel safe, to believe no one was watching, before I tore their little world apart. Instead of confronting them, I went home and started planning. I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed every detail I knew. Dates, times, receipts I remembered from her work trips. I even photographed the cufflink I had taken from the hotel room earlier, just to have physical proof. As I stared at the screen, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just trying to confirm her betrayal anymore. I was preparing for war. Around midnight, she came home, smelling faintly of wine and some cologne that wasn't mine. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and said she was exhausted from work stuff. I looked her in the eye and told her I loved her. And I did, in some broken way. But I also hated her in that moment. I hated the way she thought I was too blind to see through her lies. I spent the next 2 days gathering every thread I could. I checked our bank account and found charges that didn't make sense. Boutique hotels, expensive dinners, all under vague merchant names. I traced back her work emails when she left her laptop open and found messages that were almost sickening to read, full of inside jokes and late-night plans. Spencer wasn't just a fling. He was someone she'd been carefully building a secret life with. But the worst part? It wasn't the affair itself. It was that she seemed so normal with me, so effortless, like I was a piece of furniture in her life. And I knew I couldn't confront her with just anger. No, I needed her to see that I knew everything. I needed her to feel what I felt. So I came up with a plan. A twisted, desperate plan. By the third night after the hotel discovery, I had gone from confusion to obsession. My entire life seemed to orbit around catching Marla in the act, as if proving her betrayal would somehow give me back the power I'd lost. It wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about control. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily she smiled at me, how effortlessly she said goodnight, while I lay awake wondering if her skin still carried the scent of him. That thought alone was enough to push me past my breaking point. I started setting up what I called the trap, though in truth, I wasn't sure if I wanted to catch her or burn everything to the ground. The first step was simple. I told her I had an overnight work trip. I made it sound casual, even threw in a sigh about how annoying it was to drive 3 hours for some pointless meeting. She barely reacted, just gave me a small, distracted nod as she scrolled through her phone. That hurt more than I expected. I realized she didn't even pretend to care where I was anymore. Once she left for work the next morning, I stayed behind and started preparing. I installed a small recording device under the living room shelf, something I'd ordered online in a haze of paranoia the night before, and set up a discreet camera in the corner of the bedroom, disguised as a cheap air freshener. It felt dirty, wrong, but there was no turning back now. I needed to know if she would bring him here, into our home, into the space we built together. The very thought made me sick. By evening, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited in the shadows like some broken version of myself. I watched our house through binoculars, my heart pounding every time a car drove by. Hours passed, nothing happened, and I started doubting myself. Maybe she wouldn't risk bringing him here. Maybe she was smarter than that. But then, at 9:47 p.m., the black SUV appeared again. I recognized that smug silhouette even from a distance. I wanted to run at them, to tear open the car door and drag him out, but I stayed still, gripping the steering wheel until my palms ached. I watched as they entered the house, laughing, holding hands like they belonged together. My vision blurred with rage, and I nearly started the engine just to crash into his car. But I didn't. I sat there, shaking, letting my camera do the dirty work. By the time they left, it was past midnight. I waited another hour before going back inside. The house smelled faintly of Marla's perfume and something else, a cologne that didn't belong to me. I walked through each room, my hands trembling as I imagined them here, together. Then I went to my laptop, downloaded the camera footage, and watched. The first few minutes were unbearable. Seeing her like that, smiling in ways I hadn't seen in years, laughing like she used to with me. It was like watching my own ghost. But then something happened that made my blood run cold. Near the end of the recording, Spencer leaned in close to her and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. She nodded, and I saw her slip something into his hand. It wasn't a kiss or a hug that broke me. It was the way they looked at each other, like they were planning something bigger. I sat there until the sun came up, staring at the screen, replaying those moments over and over. My plan had worked. I had proof. But instead of feeling vindicated, I felt hollow, like I'd dug too deep and unearthed something I wasn't prepared for. The next step was clear, and yet I dreaded it. I had to confront her. But I wouldn't just ask her. I would corner her so completely that there would be no room for lies. I needed her to break. I didn't confront Marla that morning. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to, but every time I imagined her face, her calm, practiced smile, I hesitated. She was too good at lying. If I stormed in without a plan, she'd twist my words, flip the story, and somehow I'd end up doubting what I'd seen with my own eyes. So instead of shouting, I stayed quiet, and quiet is where I'm the most dangerous. The day crawled by. I kept watching the footage over and over, pausing on every detail like a detective in some cheap thriller. The way Spencer brushed her hair back like he owned her, the way she leaned into his hand, smiling in that private way that I hadn't seen in years, it made me sick. But there was something else, something subtle. When she handed him that small envelope, her eyes darted around the room like she was afraid someone might see. And then there was her expression. It wasn't just romance. It was fear mixed with urgency, like they were on some kind of clock. I didn't just feel betrayed anymore. I felt like I was missing a much bigger piece of the puzzle. I decided to corner her in a way she couldn't escape. That night, I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just something that would lull her into thinking life was normal. I even poured her favorite wine. She walked into the kitchen with her phone in hand, her face glowing from the screen, and for a second I wondered if she'd even notice me watching her so intently. "You seem quiet," she said, half distracted. I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day." It wasn't until after dinner that I made my move. I slid the laptop across the table to her. The video paused on a frame of her and Spencer laughing in our living room. Her eyes landed on it, and the color drained from her face instantly. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You tell me," I said, leaning forward. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut like glass. "Who is he, Marla? How long has this been going on? And don't," I raised a finger before she could speak, "don't lie to me. Not now." She stared at me like I'd just stripped her bare in the middle of the street. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see her mind racing, trying to piece together some excuse, some story, but there was nothing. Not this time. Finally, she muttered, "It's not what you think." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Not what I think. You bring him here, into our home, and it's not what I think. You look me in the eye every day and pretend nothing's wrong. And you have the nerve to tell me I'm imagining this?" Her hands shook as she reached for the laptop, maybe to close it, but I slammed my hand on the table. "Don't you dare." That's when I saw it. Something shift in her eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but fear. A fear so deep it silenced her. She wasn't just afraid of me finding out about Spencer. She was afraid of something else entirely. "Neil," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand. This isn't just an affair. It's bigger than us." For a moment, I didn't move. Her words felt like a hook sinking into my chest. Bigger than us? What the hell was she talking about? Before I could press her, her phone buzzed on the counter. She grabbed it like it was a lifeline, glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "I have to go," she said, standing abruptly. I blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." Her eyes darted toward the door, her breathing quickened. "Neil, please. If you love me, don't follow me tonight." And with that, she bolted, leaving me standing in the kitchen with 1,000 questions and a rage I could barely contain. But of course, I followed her. I followed Marla that night, my heart pounding like I was chasing the end of my world. She drove fast, cutting through the empty streets, and I kept a safe distance, my mind spinning with every possible scenario. I was ready for the worst, that I'd find her with Spencer again, that I'd see something I could never erase from my memory. But when she stopped, it wasn't at the hotel or some fancy restaurant. She parked in front of an old brick building with dim lights and a broken neon sign that read shelter. I watched as she rushed inside, and after a few minutes, I followed. What I saw stopped me cold. The building wasn't a secret hideout or a romantic getaway. It was a community shelter, filled with women and children. Marla was kneeling in front of a little girl, helping her tie her shoes. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She looked up at Marla with the kind of trust that made my chest tighten. I stood there, confused and shaken, until Marla spotted me. For a moment, her expression was a mix of anger and resignation, but then she sighed, like she'd been carrying a weight for far too long. She walked over and said quietly, "You followed me." I couldn't even find the words. "What is this? What's going on?" She led me into a small office in the back and finally told me everything. Spencer wasn't her lover. He was her boss, yes, but also the founder of a charity program she'd secretly been part of for the last year. The hotel room? It wasn't for an affair. It was a temporary safe place for families escaping abusive situations. Marla had been helping one of her co-workers hide from her violent ex, and secrecy was the only way to keep everyone safe. The note I found, the cufflink, the strange late-night calls, all of it had nothing to do with betrayal. Marla had been terrified that if I found out, I might confront someone dangerous or expose something that could put those women at risk. She kept me in the dark not because she didn't love me, but because she was protecting someone else's life. I sat there like an idiot, all my anger evaporating into shame. So, all this time, I thought, I couldn't even finish the sentence. Marla looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Neil, you've always believed the worst of yourself, and now you believe the worst of me too. I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't tell you everything. Not yet." Something broke inside me, not in a bad way, but in the way a locked door finally gives way. For the first time in years, I really saw her. The woman who would fight for strangers, who would risk everything for someone else's safety. I felt small for doubting her, but I also felt proud. Proud that she was mine. We drove home in silence, holding hands, and when we walked inside, I took my ring out of her purse and slipped it back on. No more hiding. No more games. That night, lying in bed, I whispered, "I'm sorry," and she kissed me like she'd been waiting to hear that for a long time. We weren't perfect, far from it, but in that moment, I knew we'd come out of this stronger. The storm was over, and for the first time in weeks, I slept.